everybody to the Brian Peterson School of Photography's weekly critique. I'm Lee Varis, and I have the great privilege to be the instructor for the Photoshop Layers Fundamentals course. We're going to be looking at some images today that were submitted for the critique. We'll start off with this one, which is called Clouds Over the Lake. And this was from Cornelia Denk. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She says the photo was taken at the Lake Hintersee in the German Alps, and I wanted to capture the movements of the clouds, and therefore I used a 1000 ND filter. Photo was taken on a tripod, EOS 7D, 10 to 18 millimeter lens, f9, ISO 100, 20 seconds. Okay, so we've got a nice sort of motion blur, longer exposure to get that kind of feeling of movement in the clouds here. This is very nice. I will say the only thing that really kind of disturbs me is that the horizon isn't level. So we have a very clear horizon here, and it's not quite level. So let's see if we can fix that. I'm just going to get the crop tool and get this straighten tool here. So if I click on that, I'll get this straightened, and I can make it line it up along the horizon, hit the line here, which is the edge of the lake. And we're not going to delete the crop pixels, so I have that unchecked. I can always change my mind here, but we'll go ahead and fix that. Let's go to full frame here, and we'll zoom in a little bit. So let's see if I can get this to you can see how when it's crooked, it feels a little like it just feels a little uncomfortable, and when we straighten it out, it's now seems more comfortable. So you know, it's not always easy to photograph with a straight horizon unless you have one of those automatic level indicators in your camera. But you can always crop and adjust it after the fact in post. I think that helps this image. I can't really think of anything else I would suggest here because it's a nice composition. I think you've got some interest here with the clouds. And it's a good landscape, a nice foreground area here, giving you a sense of standing in the scene. I think it works well. So let's return now to our next one, which is this, the Rose. Okay, so this one is called Rose, and it's by Desi. I hope that's, you know, I don't have the last name here, but Desi writes, I was trying to learn how to make a high key image. I'm not sure if this really is high key or not. Well, Desi, it's definitely high key. It's about as high key as it gets. White on white is definitely a high key image. I have a homemade light box with white Valine stretched over a frame, so I use that as a background with the sun shining onto the background, and my rose was shaded. This was shot with a Canon 100D with a 100mm macro lens, f11, 1 second, ISO 100. It was a pink rose, so edits in Lightroom were to convert to black and white by desaturating, and then I resaturated the green and yellow, making it look like a white rose. And I think you've definitely succeeded here. This one, I really, you know, cannot think of anything I would suggest. You know, I really can't suggest any improvements. I think it's a really wonderful image, and it's a very successful high key image. So, sorry, I don't have much more to say about that, but let's move on. We have this next image, which is called Cloud Dance. And this is from Dan White. This is one of a series of shots I took on a spring afternoon back in 2007, and it's my favorite from that day. I don't know if I had any particular goal in mind just get the polarizer on and start shooting. I remember it was quite breezy, so the cloud formations were fleeting, constantly changing shape and form. This shape maybe lasted 5 seconds before morphing into something else, and it really felt like the clouds were dancing. Amazing to witness. And I have to agree. You know, we have what really is kind of interesting about this photograph is that the shapes that the clouds are making here uh, mimic kind of the shapes of the tree branches. So it's kind of interesting. I think um, one of my issues here with this image is that there's a lot going on. There's a lot of high frequency contrast where there's a lot of kind of detail in the clouds and lots of detail in the trees with the branches, and it's almost like your eye doesn't know where to look. And I'd like to suggest that maybe we can get these tree branches to separate from the background a little bit. In order to do that, it seems like your tree branches are all very black. So I'm going to suggest that we make a curve adjustment, and we'll find the the tone that is the dark part of the sky. It's very low down on the curve here. So I'm going to go ahead and place a point for that. And I want to elevate this. I want to make the sky a little bit lighter. I mean, it's nice and dramatic this way, but if I can make it lighter and still keep these trees really dark, so you know the trees are, gonna have to zoom in here to get an accurate reading. So the trees are right down there. They're pretty black, and I'd like to get the sky a little bit lighter to help separate it from the trees, right, especially up in here. And then we'll kind of bring the curve back. We'll flatten it out just a little bit to put the detail back in the highlights of the clouds. Okay, so let's kind of see what we've got going on here. So trying to lighten the background and kind of reduce the contrast of the background a little bit to make the trees stand out a little bit better. Because here you see the sky and the clouds and the detail, it's just too much back behind the trees, and by lightening it we kind of help simplify that background behind the trees and make them show up a little bit. It's a tough image, and I think you have a nice composition. I just think that there's kind of almost too much going on with all the tree branches, but this I think helps it a little bit to kind of simplify it a little bit and make the branches stand out. And again, I think it's a really interesting idea. I think the shapes of the clouds are very interesting in that they mimic, in a way, the shapes of the tree branches. So I think it was very, very well observed and seen image. And I just think that in this rendering, it's just too dark and too contrasty everywhere. And if there's contrast everywhere, it's almost like you might as well have contrast nowhere. So you have to have a star of the shot. And I think this helps make the trees a little bit more prominent and gives you kind of a foreground subject to look at. It's hard, you know, it's like everything is too contrasty here, and so your eye is wandering around not knowing what to fix on, and I think this helps it a little bit. All right, let's move on. And this one, let's see if we can find my notes here. This one's called The Tailor. It's by Edwin Younan and taken in the souks of South Lebanon. I don't have any notes or information about this, but it's a wonderful environmental portrait. I kind of wish he was looking right at the camera, but he has this sort of pensive look on his face, and he's, you know, maybe in reverie. The only thing that that really bugs me about this is that this the sewing machine object here is slightly out of focus. And everything seems like everything in the image it really wants to be in focus, and mostly everything is in focus except this foreground object, which is that's his tool of his trade. You know, that's a really kind of important element in this image because it really lets us know that he's a tailor. And I think if it was larger in the frame and it was more out of focus, it might be a little more acceptable. In this case, it's sort of like it's not quite sharp enough to be in focus, and so it just feels sort of like a mistake. Like you could have had a little more depth of field here, picked a smaller aperture to get just a little bit more depth of field. That being said, this really is kind of a wonderful image, and I think everything about the lighting on his face. Again, I just wish he was looking at the camera, but a minor thing in this case, I think it's okay to have him in this sort of reverie here, surrounded by the tools of his trade, and it's a very interesting environment that tells you a lot about this person. So, very cool. Let's see, let's move on here. We have one more image, and this one is called Fun in the City at Night. And it's by Rose Campbell. And she writes, I was trying to take a photo of the skyline with my nephews and their mom, but I can't figure out why the skyline has reflected on them. I'm hoping for a blind critique. Well, I'm not blind, but I'm going to give you a critique for this, and I'll tell you why that's happening. I was using a Nikon 750 at f4.5 for 8 seconds, ISO 100, focal length 18 millimeter with a flash SB910 flash. Okay, so we've got two things going on here. We have a flash, which is instantaneous, and that's what's lighting the people. And then you have a long exposure, 8 seconds, to pull in the ambient light. This is sometimes referred to as dragging the shutter. So you're making the shutter speed slower so that you can build up the background, which is all the buildings here. But it's 8 seconds. The flash goes off instantly at the beginning, and it freezes them. And then they move. They walk away. They move over. But since they're not lit, they don't contribute to the exposure. The flash lights them, but the flash doesn't carry off into the background. So what you have here is you have the background bleeding through. It's not reflecting on them. It's actually bleeding through where they were standing when the flash went off. Since you have an 8-second exposure, it's pretty easy for them to move. I mean, they could have walked out of the frame in the time that you had the exposure on. So that's why the background's bleeding through there. If you wanted the background to not bleed through, you'd have to have them stand still. So you'd take the picture, have them hold still for 8 seconds, which is, good luck making that happen with the little kid here. The other thing I would say, this also suffers a bit from a tilted horizon. We could see if we can fix that. I don't have a horizon to stretch across, but I do have verticals. These buildings should be totally vertical. So if I just line up along the edge of the building, I can get it to straighten out that way. And that is now better, I think, than it was. So, and then again, with this technique, you either are going to have them hold still for 8 seconds, or, well, I mean, that's the only way you're going to do it to get this kind of flash fill shot. So, all right, so now you know. So next time, when you take the picture, you'll shout, "Freeze!" and everybody will stop moving, and then you can get the shot without having the background bleed through. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye bye now.